Okay, so for this deep dive, we're looking at something a little different. It's a scientific analysis of singular interpersonal desire in the context of Yuletide consumerism.
Which is a very academic way of putting it.
It really is. Basically, we're treating a very, very well-known song as a case study. You know the one?
Yeah.
Our mission here is to figure out what happens psychologically when all the traditional holiday symbols are just pushed aside.
Totally displaced.
Yeah, displaced by a focus on a single social bond.
And what's really fascinating is that the analysis found this complete psychological override. They call it a singular desire profile, or SDP.
SDP, okay.
Yeah, and the core finding is that the subject seems to have done a sort of internal calculation. And the conclusion is that proximity to this one specific person has a dramatically higher utility than anything else.
Higher utility. That sounds so clinical. Are we really saying this person calculated that a human connection has a better return on investment than, a new gadget?
In a way, yes. And the reason the sources use that term is because the evidence for what they call material rejection is just so firm.
So what's the evidence for that?
Well, the subject explicitly states they don't care about the presents underneath the Christmas tree, and they go even further, dismissing toys on Christmas Day.
That's a pretty direct rejection of a whole holiday economy.
It is. It's a huge deviation from, standard socioeconomic expectations. The analysis suggests the anticipated emotional reward from this connection just completely exceeds the dopamine response you'd get from a material good.
So the brain's reward system has been, totally rewired.
Exactly.
And this goes beyond just the gifts, right? It's the whole environment, too. The light shining brightly, the children's laugh. It's all just background static.
It is. It's just contrast. It does nothing to satisfy the primary requirement. It's only there to emphasize the internal focus.
Even the sleigh bells ringing.
Even those. They just become the sort of rhythmic catalyst for the request. The environment itself is just noise.
So if the consumer model is out and the environment doesn't matter, how does the subject actually plan to achieve this goal?
This leads us to what the research calls the mistletoe protocol.
The mistletoe protocol. I like it.
Yeah, the subject adopts a very clear, passive observational stance. The line is, I'm just going to keep on waiting underneath the mistletoe.
So they're relying on a known cultural social cue to facilitate the interaction. A strategy.
It is a strategy. And that's the real aha moment.
Right. They refuse to engage in the whole, what the study calls the North Pole administrative process.
No sending a list to St. Nick, no.
Exactly. There's a critical shift away from relying on some mythical intervention to a direct requirement for human connection. It's about taking control.
And that's really the final conclusion. For the subject, Christmas isn't a tradition or a location. It's purely a temporal window. A time to optimize this one specific relationship.
And the repetition in the data just cements that.
Right. It emphasizes the stability of the desire. It's not a fleeting wish.
So here's something to think about. Consider this idea of materialism displacement in your own life. When you're focused on one singular powerful wish, a huge career goal, maybe a personal connection, what's the equivalent of your Christmas lights and sleigh bells? What's the background noise you've learned to successfully tune out to get that one thing? That's something to mull over. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are wrestling with a source document whose title alone is quite something. It's called Longitudinal Analysis of Recurring Seasonal Affective Trauma and Prophylactic Romantic Realignment.
Oh, right.
Wow. I mean, that title alone tells you the subject is taking this very seriously.
It is a phenomenal example of how people try to rationalize and, control extreme emotional pain. Our mission here is really to unpack this study of what's known as the Last Christmas, or LC, cycle.
That annual, very specific emotional loss tied to the holidays.
Exactly. And we want to see how people try to implement genuine risk mitigation after something like that.
Okay, so let's unpack this with the core framework. The research suggests the subject's entire shift is guided by this, the simple but rigid philosophy of the once bitten, twice shy model, OBTS.
That's it. This OBTS psychological framework, it drives the move from, say, high-risk emotional investment to a much more defensive, selective allocation of what the study calls heart resources.
Emotional capital.
Well, emotional capital. The whole point is capital preservation.
And the inciting incident, the trauma that launched this entire study in the first place. The sources point to this central cognitive dissonance, the devastating encounter with a former lover with a fire in his heart, who subsequently showed a definite and very sudden soul of ice.
And that's not just an emotional withdrawal, that's a deep freeze.
Right.
It's the shock of that volatility, that rapid temperature drop that forces the entire system reboot.
So let's look at the past then. Cycle alpha, year mega 1. This was defined by high emotional expenditure and then, well, total loss.
A total wipeout.
And the core analysis here is what they call the gift-giver paradox.
Mm-hmm.
The investment methodology was wrapped in scent, and it even included formal documentation.
Yeah, a note saying, I love you.
So what's the breakdown point?
Yeah.
Is the paradox that the subject basically conflated a material gift with a guaranteed emotional return?
Precisely. That is the paradox. They confused a high-value physical asset with secure emotional currency. And if you tie that back to the timeline, the data gets really granular. The analysis of the loss is chillingly specific. The failure occurred precisely 24 hours post-transaction.
The very next day.
The very next day.
That is just brutal.
It suggests dangerous volatility in the recipient's market for affection. The asset depreciated faster than a holiday clearance item.
Which, validates the immediate need for a defensive approach.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to cycle beta, the current year, and the intense defensive prototyping we're seeing now. The subject has clearly shifted from a broadcast model of affection to what the study calls a targeted vetting model.
Let's just call it strategic dating.
Strategic dating, right? The intent is vocalized over and over. To save me from tears, I'll give it to someone special.
That proactive defense is undeniable, but you have to wonder, right? Isn't it a fundamentally flawed approach?
How so?
Well, if the goal is real love, doesn't this hyper-defensive allocation of heart resources risk preventing any real connection from even forming?
Ah, that's the critical tension. The subject seems trapped between needing safety and wanting a genuine return. We see it play out in the crowded room.
Mm-hmm. The observed behaviors.
There's active social avoidance, I keep my distance, and this constant nervous visual scanning for threats.
And here's where it gets really interesting in the source material. Note the secondary stressor that's mentioned, the tired eyes among peers.
Oh, right.
This isn't just personal trauma anymore. The subject is observing that the entire social environment is strained. It probably reinforces their need for seclusion, confirms their extreme defense mechanisms are warranted.
So we have this highly analytical defense system built on painful historical data, but then the sources reveal the ultimate Achilles heel.
Yes.
Despite all the logical safeguards, the subject admits that a simple physical stimulus, specifically a kiss, could override the entire system.
All that strategic planning undone by one moment of chemistry. It raises a big question about emotional responses versus logical defenses.
So where does that leave us?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the long-term impact is clear. While the trauma is fixed to the holiday season, the resulting behavior persists as a long-term strategy for risk mitigation.
The search for a real love to replace that high-risk undercover model.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've seen this difficult emotional evolution, the progression from recklessly giving away their heart to the agonizing process of watching it burn. Now, it's all about risk. So consider this. If maximum safety requires such a restricted, targeted allocation of emotional capital is the true cost of this prophylactic realignment, the guarantee that any investment you make will be too cautious to ever yield the real love you're actually craving.
Something to mull over.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're putting on our lab coats for a minute because our mission today is a forensic analysis of a very specific social interaction. We're doing a deep dive into the mechanics of the Christmas party hop, specifically from that classic song, Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree.
And what's so fascinating here is that the scientists, they didn't see a party. They saw a laboratory.
Right.
They wanted to measure, rhythmic social synchronicity, the raw drivers of what makes a group feel together.
And the setup is just fantastic. You've got the spatial anchor, which they call the coniferous specimen.
We'll just call it the tree.
We'll just call it the tree. And the goal is synchronized dancing, or as they put it, merriment. But then this is critical. There's a reward system.
Yes, the biochemical incentive.
The promise of post-activity pumpkin pie.
That caloric reward, it provides the baseline. So from there, we can analyze the movement, which brings us to maybe the most interesting finding about spatial friction. The tree is the gravitational center, sure, but it's the placement of a specific botanical marker. The mistletoe, hung where you can see.
The famous mistletoe obstruction effect.
Precisely. The data shows it creates this predictable, almost mandatory bottleneck in the flow of people.
Every couple tries to stop.
Every single one.
Fair.
And that tells us something huge. A simple plant can completely override the main goal of the party, which is movement, just to facilitate, a personal exchange.
It's a social stop sign. You know you should keep going, but you just can't.
You can't. The social risk is too high.
So if visual cues stop the movement, let's talk about the acoustic triggers, the ones that start the emotion. They call it the sentimental acoustic response.
Right, and this is where we shift from physics to chemistry. There's a really strong direct link between the audio input and the person's internal emotional state.
How so?
When people hear specific neuro-linguistic triggers, phrases like voices singing "Let's be jolly" or "Deck the halls," it induces what they call a sentimental feeling.
A 100% success rate, they claim. But that sounds almost too clean, doesn't it? I mean, are people just performing the happiness they're supposed to feel?
That's the critical question, and honestly,
Juicy.
it almost doesn't matter whether it's genuine or just performance. The result is identical.
Which is?
The trigger creates a collective positive state. It gets everyone on the same page emotionally and prepares them for the core idea of the whole thing.
The new old-fashioned way.
The new old-fashioned way.
Okay, so let's break that down because it feels like the heart of this entire deep dive. What is this recursive cultural loop they're talking about?
It's the intentional simulation of historical social behaviors. Things like formal dancing, caroling in a group, things that were pretty rigid back in the day.
But they're not rigid now.
Exactly. They're being performed in a totally contemporary context.
So it's like we're trying to recreate a Norman Rockwell painting, but with, smartphones in our pockets and none of the old social pressures.
That's a perfect way to put it. The old-fashioned part is the ritual, the thing that binds everyone together. But the new part is the accessibility.
Yeah.
It strips away the pressure.
It lets you participate without the risk.
And that synthesis, that blend of nostalgia and modern ease, is the primary driver of a successful festive group dynamic.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to make sure things go well this season?
It means success is really about measurable variables. You need the rhythm, you need that caloric reward, the pumpkin pie, and you need that balance of nostalgic rituals with modern social comfort.
And the conclusion is so provocative. They say that the spirit we always talk about, it's not magic. It's a measurable output of all these combined variables.
It is, which leaves you with a really interesting question to think about. If that feeling of collective spirit is just the predictable result of plants, music, and specific phrases, how many of your other social dynamics, from work meetings to family dinners, rely on similar, maybe unrecognized triggers to get the outcome they want? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to treat a simple holiday song, one we all know, not as music, but as a complex system.
A system of integrated behavioral protocol.
Exactly. Our mission is to analyze the sources on acoustic chronometry and kinetic synchronization, which is, the formal name researchers are giving the Jingle Bell Rock phenomenon.
That's right. We're really dissecting the socio-acoustic state itself. The JBR effect is characterized by a high-frequency auditory stimuli.
All the chiming and ringing.
Right, and the findings show it directly coerces and coordinates collective movement. The core metric they use isn't just beats per minute. They track something called jingle bell time, or JBT.
So if I'm following, acoustic chronometry is just a fancy way of saying they're studying how the music makes people move, and this JBT is the key.
It's absolutely the key. JBT measures synchronization lag. It quantifies the delay between the sound and the group's physical response. In a high JBT state, that lag almost disappears. The efficiency is, well, it's far superior to your typical dance floor. People are moving almost instantly with the beat.
Okay, let's unpack this methodology, because this is where the whole study gets really interesting. The data is from the Jingle Bell Square urban simulation.
Yes.
And they were tracking environmental variables like snowing and blowing, and they actually identified the frosty air, the cold, as a necessary catalyst.
A catalyst for kinetic heat generation. It's the ultimate thermal management system. You dance to stay warm. But we have to talk about how they measured happiness.
Wait, you mean the bushels of fun? How do the sources even defend that as a metric? That sounds so fuzzy.
It does, but they define a bushel based on observable expressions. Laughter, vocalizations, high energy prancing.
I see.
And what's fascinating here is the temporal optimization they found. The research pinpointed a specific bright time that directly correlates with the right time to rock the night away.
So participants have a kind of internal clock that aligns their energy with the night, like they're biologically primed to rock at night.
Though it's the data suggests. But that's just for humans. What happens when you add another species?
Right, the most unusual observation, interspecies kinetic coordination.
Hmm.
We have to talk about the synchronization between people and the mammalian transport assets.
Ah, yes. The giddy-up jingle horse.
The jingle horse. So how do you keep a unified rhythm when you bring in an animal with a totally different gait?
It's not easy, especially when the goal is glide-in maneuvers with a one-horse sleigh.
Exactly.
Well, the research shows the JBR effect requires specific verbal commands, like pick up your feet and jingle around the clock, to get the horse into what they call the JBR gait.
A 4-beat rhythm.
A unified 4-beat rhythm. It's absolutely essential for peak kinetic energy in the square.
I'm just picturing the training manual now. But okay, if they get that rhythmic control, what's the social payoff?
Yeah.
That leads to the mix and a-mingle protocol.
Right. If the horse provides the glide, the participants provide the density. The whole jingle and feet thing is really just an efficient social networking strategy.
So all that prancing and dancing isn't random.
Not at all. It's optimized, high-density social engagement, all contained within the square's geography.
So what does this all mean for you, the keen observer?
The conclusion is pretty robust. JBR is this complex integration of temporal mechanics, interspecies cooperation, and thermal management. The move from chiming to rocking represents total immersion in this synchronized festive reality.
And critically, it bypasses traditional social fatigue.
It does.
So Jingle Bell Rock isn't just a song. It's an engineered system for peak efficiency and joy output, all backed by some delightfully bizarre data.
So here's something to mull over. Given that this synchronized state is so effective at bypassing social fatigue, how could we apply this understanding of acoustic chronometry to optimize, say, non-festive, everyday cooperative tasks? Maybe your next big meeting just needs a little more cowbell.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a really fascinating stack of research. It's all focused on the anxiety that swirls around holiday relationships.
Right, that whole, will they still be here in January question.
Exactly. The researchers call it predictive modeling of seasonal attachment.
Which is a bit of a mouthful, but it really just boils down to that tension, the clash between a fun, whirlwind, festive romance and the real need for long-term commitment. It's all about risk.
It is. And what's so interesting is how the source material zeroes in on what they call the Santa Tell Me inquiry.
I love that name.
Me too.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that people are actively looking for some kind of
validation.
yes, some mythical or divine validation about a relationship's future before they really commit their emotional energy.
Right. The goal is to figure out if this person has a sustainability rating that extends beyond, the current fiscal year.
So the mission today is to really unpack these sophisticated, almost anxious strategies people use during that Christmas to New Year window.
It's all about protecting themselves from emotional volatility. And the sources are very clear. They categorize the holiday season as a profoundly high-risk environment.
High risk how?
Well, it's prime territory for what they label temporary romantic spikes.
Okay.
So these are intense but completely unsustainable bonds that are just fueled by eggnog and twinkling lights.
A boom and bust cycle every December.
That's a perfect way to put it. But the real anxiety comes from what the historical data shows.
Which is?
The fear of the New Year's Day dissipation effect. It's a recurring pattern.
Where the interpersonal value just plummets after the 25th.
It drops to zero. It suggests the entire interest was just tied to seasonal novelty, not a genuine connection. They're trying to avoid that January 1st dump.
So, okay, let's get into the defense mechanisms.
Right.
How does this fear actually show up in people's behavior?
Well, we see this intense constraint implementation. People are deliberately, putting the emotional brakes on.
So what does that look like?
It means active avoidance of, and I'm quoting the source here, every mistletoe.
You're kidding. So they're physically avoiding opportunities for romance.
Physically avoiding them, yeah. Until the true love variable, as they call it, is verified.
That's incredible. And the research also mentioned the demand for thermal metaphors.
Ah, yes. The fire and the cold.
Right. They aren't just looking for a holiday partner. They're demanding proof of long-term domestic stability.
Mm-hmm.
They want to see that 25th by the fireplace scenario for next year, not just this one.
Exactly. And this leads to what is maybe the most startling result, something called holiday mood suppression.
So, they're resisting being happy.
The data shows a measurable resistance to engaging with the festive mood. I mean, even when they're bombarded with triggers like let it snow on the radio,
Right.
festive enjoyment is essentially gated. You don't get to feel cheerful until that he won't be here next year risk is eliminated.
And this is where the oracle request comes in, right? The repeated asking of, Santa, tell me if you're really there.
It's a psychological safety mechanism. You're outsourcing the burden of your own romantic intuition.
The desire to be smart this year. It sounds like a move toward data-driven dating.
It really is, and it highlights this sharp conflict between immediate seasonal fun and the need for long-term emotional security. The whole thing is this highly sophisticated, if anxious, strategy for what you could call festive resource management.
So if we pull back, what does this all mean for the bigger picture? If refusing to give it all away without a guarantee is the new standard,
Yeah.
what does that say about how we value relationships now?
That raises a really important question. If our fear of emotional loss is so strong that we actually suppress immediate joy,
Yeah.
are we optimizing our relationships at the cost of actually, experiencing them?
Is festive dating just doomed to be treated as a risk assessment until the moment the calendar flips? A fascinating, maybe slightly chilling thought for you to mull over.
Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at a really fascinating piece of research today. It's a macro-environmental study called Visual Spatial Transformation and Generational Priority Divergence.
Sounds academic, I know.
It does, yeah. But our mission here is to sort of unpack what it's telling us about the start of what the researchers call the new old-fashioned season.
Right. And what's key here is that it moves beyond just feelings or anecdotes. It defines this beginning to look phase, or BTL, as a measurable event.
So we're talking about hard data.
Exactly. Hard data on how our environment gets changed to trigger a specific cultural response.
Okay, so let's start with the visual signals. The study calls it the aesthetics of saturation.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about sturdy biological markers, so coniferous anchors.
And something called aesthetic listening. It's all about signaling reliability. The markers have to last.
But the commercial data is where it really gets wild, right?
Oh, absolutely. In what they call the 5 and 10 locations, they measured a 300% increase in silver lane reflectivity.
A 300% increase.
300%. You combine that with, candy canes, and you get this high contrast visual field that tells you this is happening everywhere you go.
You can't escape it.
You're not supposed to.
And they were tracking this across 3 areas, I see.
Yes, 3 distinct sectors.
There's a commercial sector, which is tracking things like, hop-along boots and pistols that shoot.
All the key acquisition targets. Then you have the civic sector.
To big public displays, Grand Hotel versus the parks.
And finally, the domestic, which it seems much smaller, just measuring holly on the front door.
Okay, so the environment is completely saturated. How does that saturation actually affect people?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting.
The generational divergence.
A stark divergence. Let's look at the younger group first, the juvenile cohort. The study names Barney, Ben, Janice, Jen.
And for them, what's the desired outcome?
It was 100% unanimous.
100%?
100% preference for hardware acquisition. They want the toys. The system is working perfectly on them.
Okay, but then you contrast that with the parental cohort.
A completely different story.
Their main goal became the resumption of educational infrastructure.
They want school to start again.
I mean, the study's language is so clinical here. It talks about holiday-induced domestic density reaching a threshold of diminishing returns.
It sounds cold, I know, but the data suggests that for the adults, there's a real psychological pressure point building up.
So while the kids are focused on getting things, the adults are just trying to manage the density.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But for all that pressure and all that commercial investment, the most powerful signal was, surprisingly, not the big stuff.
I saw that. The prettiest sight, according to participants, wasn't the giant hotel display.
No.
It was the holly on their own front door.
Exactly. It shows that the small domestic signal carries a much, much higher emotional weight. The macro shift is validated by the micro response.
So if we pull this all together, the BTL phenomenon is this total environmental thing. It needs the big, sturdy infrastructure.
But it also needs this synchronization of completely different human needs.
Right.
And the study identifies the final piece of the puzzle, the acoustic activation, the bells.
The bells.
It finds that the ringing isn't really triggered by a clock or some mechanical process.
What triggers it then?
The internal state of the participant, their cardiovascular and emotional state. The whole thing isn't complete until the feeling is generated from within.
Wow. So the ultimate success isn't retail sales.
Not at all. The true measure is whether that final collective response, the caroling, is genuinely, heart-based.
So what does this all mean for you, listening to this? The study seems to imply that while the commercial environment has to be almost overwhelming, that 300% reflectivity.
The whole mechanism fails unless you can internalize it.
So maybe the real lesson here is that all that manufactured awe, all that saturation, it can only ever be a prelude.
A prelude to a genuine emotion that has to come from you, right within your heart.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into some really fascinating holiday science. It's based on a study, and the title is a bit of a mouthful, The Longitudinal Study of Affective Shift and the Devaluation of Material Assets via Interpersonal Proximity.
Right.
But, what it's really trying to figure out for you is what actually generates happiness during the holidays. Okay, let's unpack this.
Our mission here is to trace how the subject's entire holiday value system was, well, completely reconfigured. The research centers on what they called the underneath the tree event, and it tracks this really drastic shift. We're moving from, a pretty low emotional baseline.
The cold and gray state.
Exactly, the cold and gray state, to this feeling of pure interpersonal fulfillment once a romantic counterpart is introduced.
So it's really like an emotional 180 then. You have these two completely different realities being compared. Can you break down those two phases for us?
Sure. So you start in what they call the retroactive phase. This is pre-event, and the subject uses these really powerful words to describe it. Lost, cold, and gray. Wow, okay.
Yeah, and that lines up perfectly with what they call the alone to celebrate protocols.
Right.
Then you contrast that sharply with the current implementation phase, where the subject is now experiencing things like carolers and falling snow, and it's all anchored by intense physical proximity, specifically holding me tight.
Okay, and that brings us to the core finding, and this is where the science gets really, really surprising. It's this concept they called material utility depreciation.
Exactly. The study confirms just a massive, statistically significant drop in the perceived value of physical inventory. So while the subject acknowledges that presents are a beautiful sight, they immediately quantify the utility of those items as, and this is a direct quote, not a thing.
Wait, hold on. Not a thing? That seems to contradict, well, decades of research on seasonal commerce, doesn't it? Are you telling me the gifts themselves have, zero value here?
Precisely. This study confirms that the U variable, that specific person, acts as a critical multiplier for everything else.
A multiplier. Without that person, the utility of the entire festive environment, from the lights to the wrapping paper, it just approaches zero. The gifts are just useless artifacts if that person isn't physically there. What's so fascinating is that it's not just a preference. The subject literally stops caring about the material assets without them.
That level of dependency for emotional stability is intense. And the mechanism for it is described with this almost kinetic energy. The subject talks about being knocked right off my feet, but at the same time,
paradoxically, yes,
feeling a total sense of security, falling with no worries at all.
That finding suggests that this high-intensity attraction provides a kind of a safety buffer against standard holiday anxieties. The partner functions as a perfect cognitive filter, really. They reduce all the environmental noise.
Oh, okay.
The subject states it explicitly, because you're near and everything's clear, and that immediately resolves that old lost and cold and gray baseline state.
So that feeling of being knocked off your feet isn't danger. It's the transition to emotional security.
Exactly. It's a high-speed transition.
And we see that security spatially anchored, don't we?
Yeah.
The physical location, specifically underneath the tree, becomes the epicenter for all this.
It does, and it's reinforced by that repetitive vocalization. Underneath the tree.
Like a mantra.
It locks in the positive affective shift. Correct.
So let's bring this all together. What does this all mean for you? The conclusion of the study is overwhelmingly clear. The primary requirement for holiday success is not the accumulation of presents, but the successful acquisition of a heart that's mine completely. It's a very efficient solution.
And that efficiency is the key implication here, I think. If this research demonstrates that interpersonal proximity is the single most effective way to mitigate seasonal affective distress, and it prevents the subject from reverting to that cold and gray baseline, well, it raises an important question. What systemic support or sustained proximity is needed to make sure that this emotional stability lasts, not just through December 25th, but, throughout the entire year? If that U multiplier is that powerful, how do you keep it turned on 24/7?
Okay, so let's just dive right in. Today we're taking one of the most classic pieces of cultural architecture, the Christmas song, and we're putting it under the microscope. The sources call it a rigorous scientific analysis of, get this, festive equilibrium.
Exactly. And, our mission here is to analyze the surprisingly complex interplay between multisensory thermal regulation, biological stimuli, and what they've termed these psychological, mythological expectancy protocols.
Wow. Okay. So in simple terms.
In simple terms, we're tracking the process, how you move from just physical comfort, feeling warm all the way through to successful, stable social integration.
That sounds incredibly thorough.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that groundwork.
Yeah.
The study starts with a core thermal variable.
It does. It looks at the balancing act between the radiant heat from an open fire and the localized cooling from what it calls the Jack Frost variable.
It brings in social factors too, right? Like
Yeah.
the folks in winter clothes.
Right, and the consumption of high-protein assets, so turkey. And what's truly fascinating is the outcome of that contrast.
The nose-nipping thing.
The nose-nipping thing. The sources argue it's not just poetry. It's a real, localized biological response. That external chill actively makes the inside feel safer, more valuable.
So it increases the subjective psychological worth of the fire.
Precisely. It's sensory anchoring. And that's the absolute first step you need to establish what they call a season-bright environment. You need the cold to appreciate the warm.
Okay, so we're physically safe, we're anchored. What happens next? This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
It really does.
The material shifts to surveillance metrics, specifically tracking the tiny tots. They call this the eyes all aglow phenomenon, or EAG.
Indeed. And the EAG phenomenon, which, we just call kid excitement, it was a core metric they used to study sleep deprivation and mythological expectancy.
And they found a real link there.
Oh, a seriously robust correlation. If a juvenile subject knows about an incoming loaded sleigh, their sleep efficiency it plummets.
Mm-hmm.
The sources specifically mention this eagle-eyed surveillance.
Wait, hold on. So they're literally analyzing kids not sleeping as a function of them trying to verify the aerodynamics of reindeer.
That's exactly it. It suggests that, for them, mythological validation is such a high-priority psychological task that it just completely overrides standard circadian rhythms. It's like an urgent, self-imposed mission.
That's incredible. And it sounds like a really unstable state for the kids, but the whole system, the whole festive equilibrium it holds. So what does it all build toward for the broader social group?
Well, this is the crux of it, the final step. Everything relies on what the research calls the simple phrase methodology.
The greed.
The greeting. The finding is that the phrase "Merry Christmas to you" works as a universal social lubricant. Its utility is, and this is intentional, age independent. It's designed to be successfully applied across the entire demographic, from, 1 to 92.
But wait, calling it a redundant but necessary cultural handshake?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that sound a little, cynical? Where's the genuine festive spirit in that analysis?
Well, the study acknowledges the genuine emotion, absolutely, but it emphasizes the function. If a phrase is used universally, consistently, and it doesn't need a complex reply.
It reduces social friction.
Massively. It's redundant in the sense that everyone knows the script, but it's necessary because it maintains social equilibrium during this high-stakes, high-excitement period. It's a guaranteed conversational success.
That's a powerful takeaway. So we've really traced the whole movement here. The template for festive success goes smoothly from physical comfort, the chestnuts, the fire, right into stable social integration through that one simple phrase.
Exactly. And considering the analysis shows this whole complex system works, despite, the potential for severe sleep deprivation in the younger subjects, it leaves you with an important question.
Which is?
What other common, seemingly simple phrases like, say, bless you after a sneeze or good game after a competition might secretly be functioning as these essential, age-independent cultural handshakes that are really just designed to keep society running smoothly?
Welcome back to the deep dive. For this dive, we're going to peel back the layers on something researchers have been looking at for a while, the phenomenon of seasonal peak happiness.
Right. And we're not just talking about, a general good mood.
No, not at all. We're looking at hard data. We're looking at the maximization of what these studies are calling the happiest, or HH coefficient.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission today is to unpack the source material here. Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at the maximization of the happiest coefficient.
And what's fascinating is that this peak state, it doesn't just happen. The research confirms it's a a temporal high in societal well-being.
Defined by what, exactly?
It's defined by a quantifiable increase in positive social interactions. They actually call it a period of high-density gay happy meetings, or GHMs.
So, like, all the times you hear someone say, be of good cheer.
Exactly that. That specific kind of positive linguistic exchange, it literally reaches its annual maximum.
So how does society coordinate that? The sources get into some pretty specific social lubricants. First, they talk about the rhythmic background of jingle belling.
Yes.
Wait, so the source says jingle belling is a required rhythm. Is the implication here that the structure is more important than the content?
That's the key finding. Absolutely. The rhythmic predictability from all that caroling, it acts as a simple but very powerful social catalyst.
And you can see the results of that.
You can. We see it when we track spontaneous hospitality. The data shows friends coming to call, unplanned social visits. That's a key indicator of success.
So it signals a decrease in social friction.
A significant decrease
Yeah.
and a huge increase in just easy spontaneous hospitality across the board.
Okay, so that tracks the external social side. But if that's the infrastructure, did the data show an internal physical effect? I noticed a particularly juicy footnote on that.
Yes, that's where it gets really interesting. They observed direct physical benefits. For instance, marshmallow-based caloric intake. When conditions are sub-zero, they noted this specific. Well, this specific food provides essential thermal benefits. It contributes directly to measured comfort.
So the science confirms it. Hot sugar is essential infrastructure.
It really is.
I have to admit, seeing much mistletoeing tracked alongside heart glow or HG measurements,
Yeah.
it feels a little cheeky. I mean, did they seriously correlate physical proximity with a physiological state?
They did, and the data is robust. They found a direct correlation. Tracking the frequency of much mistletoeing leads directly to observed internal heart glow measurements.
Wow.
It confirms that these physical rituals, these traditional cues for affection, they're not just decorative. They are measurable requirements for maintaining this equilibrium.
For MWT equilibrium.
Or on a cardiovascular level, yes.
What's also fascinating here is the finding on narrative diversification. The framework is robust enough to include an emotional element that, well, it seems to run completely counter to happiness.
You mean the duality of the narratives, right?
Yeah.
The ghost stories.
Exactly. On one hand, you have the glories of Christmases long, long ago, just pure nostalgia.
Warmth.
But then the source material also notes this strong inclusion of scary ghost stories. Why do fear-based stories feature so heavily in a period defined by peak happiness?
Precisely. That narrative duality, the nostalgic warmth paired with a gothic intrigue, it suggests a really complex psychological balancing act is at work.
So the system doesn't break, it just incorporates the fear.
It incorporates it by introducing a little bit of a chilling element and then immediately contrasting it with the comfort of a warm room and company. The positive feelings, that HH coefficient, it actually gets amplified.
Shared, contained fear enhances social cohesion.
It strengthens the overall positive state. Exactly.
So, to bring this all together for you, the sources show that the success of the happiest season, it relies on this deliberate saturation of positive stimuli, marshmallows, cheer, caroling, and the infrastructure to support it, like parties and, yes, snow.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the repetition of that phrase, most wonderful time, is identified in the research as a powerful collective mantra,
Right.
which raises an important question for you to consider. If this phrase is essentially a mantra we all participate in, what does it mean that psychological commitment reinforced by language is required to maintain a high-utility social state? Does the commitment drive the happiness, or does the happiness inspire the commitment? Something to mull over.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into what might be one of the most fascinating scientific papers we've ever come across.
It's really something.
It's called Thermodynamic Equilibrium and Crisis Management in Anthropomorphic Cryostructures. But really, it's a deep analysis of the snowman survival strategy.
And what's so incredible is how the source material uses the structural needs of the subject, the snowman, as this perfect metaphor for what a partnership really needs to survive.
Right.
The core conflict for you is this immediate danger. This is an entity that is just fundamentally sensitive to any kind of thermal change.
That's the whole game. So our mission today is to understand how this relationship, deals with that existential risk. The main challenge is just preventing phase transition.
Melting.
Exactly, melting.
Yeah.
And keeping that solid state intact. Because that's what allows for everything else. Their social features, the ears for secrets, the legs for getting around together.
That structural rigidity, It's a prerequisite, not just for, physical stuff, but for emotional reliability.
Yeah.
You lose the ice, you lose the ability to connect.
Okay, so let's get into the crisis management part.
Right.
The study talks about this concept they call the puddle utility deficit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all summed up in this one quote from the subject, which is just,
Yeah.
wow, a puddle of water can't hold me close.
That line, it cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
This isn't just about losing water. It's the complete collapse of that shared, reliable foundation.
Whole framework.
The whole framework, the frozen structure, is literally what makes an embrace possible. It's what makes the partnership dependable. If you melt, well, you've dissolved the contract.
So the first step,
Yeah.
the immediate fix, is that the entity has to actively discourage tears.
Yeah, it's a literal self-sabotage risk.
That means-
Emotional distress leads directly
To
to it.
structural failure. Wow.
And that's just the small stuff. The paper then pivots to the bigger, more existential threat, which is mobility failure. The subject is terrified of solar-induced degradation, specifically losing the legs to run.
Okay, but why the legs?
Yeah.
Why is being able to move so existentially important for commitment here?
Because without them, without stable legs, the snowman loses its ability to carry its partner, the capacity to, contribute, to move through life's challenges together. It's just seen as non-negotiable.
And that leads to the permanent solution.
That leads them to the really radical solution, yes.
This is where we move from just, maintenance into total commitment. The paper calls it the commitment protocol.
Mm-hmm.
To stabilize everything, they introduced the Mrs. Snow protocol. It's a formal adoption of a new identity under this really intense mandate. Till death will be freezing.
And that mandate is only possible because of the North Pole relocation protocol. The strategy is, it's pure, ruthless thermodynamic management.
Move somewhere it's always cold.
Exactly. A permanent migration to high-latitude regions to maximize that freezing duration. It's about aligning their geography with their lifespan.
But wait a minute, isn't that a huge overcorrection? Does the paper talk about, less extreme options? Like, could they just build a big shared shade structure or something?
It actually argues against that. The study says any temporary fix just introduces uncertainty, which is its own kind of thermal stress. They're seeking a guarantee.
Ah, so they need certainty.
Total certainty. This move is necessary to redefine the subject's entire status. They're trying to go from being a temporary, seasonal asset to a permanent domestic anchor, a home for all seasons.
Provided, of course, that all those seasons are perpetually below zero.
Right.
So when you boil it all down, what's the takeaway? The paper's conclusion is pretty stark. Romantic success in these cryodependent relationships is all about strict thermodynamic management.
It's about recognizing the physical reality of the situation. The Mrs. Snow partnership is just this unique adaptation to, climate-based romantic instability.
It's translating physics directly into a relationship guide.
The structure has to be there first.
So here's a final thought for you to take away. This study suggests that structural prerequisites, whether they're thermal, financial, legal, whatever, are the absolute foundation for social bonds. So what does this deep dive suggest about the importance of those underlying conditions in your own relationships, the things that give you the capacity to care for your partner? Maybe think about what prerequisites are essential for your own stability.